You think you can defeat me with your puny katana? My sword's steel was folded 10,000 times. It can cut through diamonds. Oh, really? Well, I have nunchucks. Dude, those are ours. What? No, they're not. Yes, they are. No, they're not. Bruce Lee used them. They're ours. Oh, yeah? Well, which martial arts are they from? Karate? Oh. Well, we still have Bruce Lee. Ah, but we have Mr. Miyagi and anime. Sun Wukong, and we were here first. You may have started it, but we perfected what you did. Set by someone who still can't do groundwork. Neither can you! Alright? Alright. When it comes to martial arts, the debate rages. Chinese martial arts were here first, but Japan perfected what they did. China had the warrior monks, while Japan had the samurai. And then Korea tries to interject and be part of the conversation.
Nobody likes you.
And it is always important to be objective, so today I will step over this metaphorical Mason-Dixon line as a respective Chinese martial arts enjoyer and take a look at what Japanese martial arts has to offer to see if there's any middle ground here. Now, as we're looking at Japanese martial arts, we first of all need to look at the history. And most of Japan's history is taken up by warfare, as well as the innovations that spring forth from it. This is what led to the China-born strategies morphing into the more notable samurai, as well as an evolution to the philosophy surrounding martial arts. Much of this knowledge would be kept to specific clans, kept hidden or secret. But even so, the necessities of the time brought about some commonalities. The reliance on horseback due to the terrain of the region also led to more need for horsebound archery.
Message for you, sir.
Strategies tailored to getting people off of horses. And in terms of close combat, wrestling. Grappling was a crucial component to samurai training, over time splitting into the two distinct camps of combat wrestling and sumo, which was more entertainment based and had been around for far longer. There was also a form of grappling which included a short sword in hand, most likely used for the common hobby of beheading opponents, as tallying the number of heads accrued. Well, when they tell you to get ahead in life, I'll see myself out. These grappling techniques later evolved, and out of which grew Jiu-Jitsu. The actual formation of Jiu-Jitsu is more in the realms of legends than fact, according to which it all began with a Chinese martial arts master named Chen Yuanbin, who had once been in Hanzhou, but moved to Japan in his later years, as many would, apparently being highly respected by the Tokugawa clan. Chen, according to legend, had a dialogue with three masterless samurai, or ronin, which then snowballed into Jiu-Jitsu, or the Chinese method of seizing a man. Evidence around this is sketchy, but it is safe to say that what happened was that Chinese techniques were mixed with Japanese grappling techniques to create Jiu-Jitsu. But things began to change as warfare ended, as the Tokugawa shogunate took hold of Japan's rule in 1603. With this came an era in which the samurai no longer had any wars to fight, forcing the continually evolving crafts of the samurai to quickly solidify and become ritualized and formalized into sports. Forms of martial arts were lost as new rituals took over. The warrior class of the samurai retained their status, but had gone from sword fighting and beheading to tea drinking and playing board games, as the bureaucracy of running a country took hold. But nothing lasts forever, as the Meiji Restoration took shape in 1868. With this restoration came a sudden jump in progression as modern ideas took hold, with more communication with the West. The old ways of the samurai were characterized as kabudo or karayu. Within a decade, the samurai were gone as the class was liquidated. Jiu-Jitsu, however, took hold quickly as a martial art. But martial arts are nothing if not continually adapting. Kano Jigoro was a slight individual standing at 5'2" and weighing 90 pounds. He began learning Jiu-Jitsu as the modernization began. At the time, Jiu-Jitsu was not at the level of having dedicated spaces or recognized regulation. Instead, it was taught behind closed doors from former samurai or samurai-adjacent individuals. Kano found himself unsatisfied with the education of these first masters, finding holes in the techniques and not really agreeing with the teaching method of the time, which was get thrown around until you learn. Sounds like secondary school football. With this dissatisfaction, he broadened his surroundings by going to the library, finding examples of Western wrestling methods. Kano spent years subsidizing his jiu-jitsu training with outside sources, and eventually became the inheritor to knowledge after his first two masters passed away, bequeathing him manuals and scrolls on the art form in 1881. Kano went to a third master in Kitu-Ryu Jiu-Jitsu, receiving additional scrolls from this master in 1883. Let's just take a moment to realize how brilliant that is. He didn't accept the holes in the system he had inherited, and so he went outside of his regular wheelhouse of knowledge and found a new way. It's brilliant! All of this led to Kano no longer practicing the jiu-jitsu of his formers. He combined together everything he had learned to create a new martial art, the Pliant Way, also known as Judo. Now, Kano did not spend all his time doing martial arts. He also ran a black market and weapons dealership. Oh, and he was also in the teaching sector. Having a hand at the Tokyo Teacher Training College, he saw the poor attitudes the boys attending school had around rules and respect, especially towards their teachers, who were weak-willed and subservient to these snot-nosed brats. Fortunately, he was in a position to do something about it. By judo throwing the brats and making them play Sega Saturn. Or by installing martial teachings into the teaching curriculum, with it, along with the values it taught, eventually becoming part of the school curriculum. Eventually, Kano installed a grading system into judo, having his students graduate into black belts, and to give judo the respect it deserved, he made his students wear a specific uniform. By 1909, including the kaigogi, or dogi, as judo was a part of the school curriculum, this change was noticed quickly, and soon other martial arts joined the trend in its wake. The gi also had the benefit of creating a communal spirit for students, as well as making all these students of different classes equal in lessons. Kano's presence in the education sector meant that many foreign eyes got to see judo in action, and even give it a go themselves, including Lafcadio Hearn, who called judo an example of how quickly judo had adapted the Western ideals and its technological feats in only a generation. It was unfortunately also used to propel some mild racism by stating that although judo was awesome, it still could not compare to the West, where it had been inspired. And this was all before World War II. And judo has gone from strength to strength since then, becoming an Olympic sport and becoming recognised as a kabuto art. Much like another martial art. We travel now to the Ryukyu Islands. The islands were used as a trading route for Chinese ships since around 1372, being a more of a liminal spot between China and Japan. This was a natural point of crossover, especially as it held descendants of those who had migrated from China in the 14th century. The fabled bringing of the 36 families of China was said to bring many things to the islands, including martial arts, such as white crane style. The history of the Ryukyu Islands held many states of discourse, including the weapons ban, brought by King Shoshin in 1507, with it being said that many of the peasant class began learning self-defense underground, using household appliances, which is what led to the use of weapons, such as the sai or nunchucks. No, I did not steal these from any turtles, why do you ask? Another weapons ban came in 1609 by the Satsuma clan of Japan, leading to the again underground development of an empty-handed style of fighting based on Chinese styles, with the sole purpose of this being to survive. The more stylistic elements of the martial art were put aside in favor of pure effectiveness. In a coincided fashion, the jiu-jitsu, which developed after the ritualization of wartime practices. They also allied with the Tangerine clan, but that's another topic. The China hand system, or Totei, or karate, began to surface to the world in the 19th century. Karate was adopted into the Ryukyu Island education system at around 1901, and like judo, was considered a refinement of older styles. Where judo and kendo were being mandated in Japanese schools, Itoso Anko petitioned for karate to be considered as well, doing this despite karate at the time not having any standard or uniform style, with each school having their own. Only recently had Miyagi Chogun. Hold on a moment. Oh, that's brilliant! Defined his style as Goju Ryu, or the hard-soft style. He nearly called it the wax-on, wax-off style, but the connotations were a bit dicey. It was Funakoshi Gichin who finally brought the martial art to mainland Japan proper. He and his Shotokan school demonstrated their style in Kyoto in 1915, published a book in 1922, and officially moved his school to Tokyo that same year. In 1936, he popularized the name moving from karate to karate, or empty hand, making it more palatable to the nationalist Japanese government, although this did cause controversy with contemporaries. He also moved for standardization and rankings for karate schools, a move which again caused problems for many schools, which had so far relied on wealth and generational birthing for their reputation. But it all really worked out as karate became known as one of the most renowned Japanese martial arts worldwide. Doesn't mean it's the best though. Oh, come on. You're still telling me that after all of that, you're still going to sit on that high horse? Look, sure, your styles have done a lot, but we've got more history. History does not make it good. No, but it does leave an impact. Japanese styles have flourished in the relatively short time that they have been around, but the whole reason why they have flourished is due to the circumstances they began in, ritualizing and standardization. Now don't get me wrong, you sometimes need that linear path to measure against and give clear boundaries, especially when establishing that foundation. Yet at the same time, there is a merit to branching off into many different styles, variations in techniques, and creating this multicolored tapestry of culture. In the end, there is no better or worse camp. There's just differences in styles. Hell, even Chinese martial arts have their root in Indian martial arts. Maybe it's better not to be constantly fighting each other. Maybe it's time we started learning from each other. Not a chance. Now give me a straight answer. Chinese is better. Fuck. Pressure point. Ugh. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, everyone, peace be with you. Jeffrey mocks other martial arts. I mean, why wouldn't he? His martial art is so great. A martial art needs to be effective, and surely there was nothing to learn from all these other martial arts. So Jeffrey mocks them. Adonis. Adonis has gotten to the very top of his martial art, but he doesn't stop there. He looks to other sources, to other martial arts, and learns from them. He humbles himself before masters of other disciplines, and he takes in their wisdom. And once he has taken in all he can, he goes back to his martial art and integrates what he has learned. But he doesn't stop there. Adonis sees other people working on their martial arts journeys, and he encourages them. He's proud of their progress and encourages them to keep going. For as long as there have been societies, there's been generational differences. Old money versus new money, what was versus what is. Martial arts is no stranger to this, with traditional martial arts versus modern martial arts. A debate that has certainly raged its fair fare over the years. From debates to matchups to a few jokes or two. But where does this whole debate come from? Where was the start of this whole divide, and where is it going to move forwards? Because if we cannot at least break bread with each other, could we at least remain neutral? Let's find out today. One of the first factors to consider when looking at martial arts and how it has evolved is not necessarily the martial arts itself, but at politics. We're already getting controversial. For a long time in Asian countries, martial arts were seen as exactly what they say on the tin. It was about martial warfare, which is basically just saying war for warfare. It was about being the most effective in their own unique ways. Learning to use a sword, a spear, a shield, a dagger, bow and arrow. Martial arts had its purpose, but beyond that it also had the purpose of spiritual enlightenment, most especially in places such as the Shaolin Temple, or at centers of Zen Buddhism where they went more into Tai Chi, where martial arts was used not just as a form of defense or as a form of warfare, it was used as a form of spiritual experience. But as war goes on over history, it also evolves with technology. And so at a certain point, punches and kicks kind of went out of fashion on the battlefield, and especially after World War II. which is also where a lot of countries such as America were first exposed to Eastern martial arts. And this is where we see American-style dojos spread their wings. As after World War II, people still wanted that communal spirit, that wartime spirit of brotherhood and of being together. They had gone through a shared experience which, coming home, no one else had experienced. And not only that, they had these newfound skills which they found didn't really find a use in society. So what do? They open up a school and they organise these things among themselves. And because it was linked to such an event as World War II, it became very personal, the practice of martial arts. And maybe even became linked to the world before warfare, before the world wars even happened, which is where there was much more of the stringent ties to tradition. You see, in the wake of a post-World War II world, it was one thing to stick to tradition, to stick to the old world. That is certainly one route to go down. But there's the other route as well of continuing to move forward, of facing the reality that this is a new world and we have to live in it. We have to move forward. And so there came the push for, well, finding more effective ways to fight. If not for actual combat, at least for sparring. And it's become to the point where we have 3 new camps of martial practice. Where first we have traditional martial arts, the ones which place tradition over effectiveness. These are martial arts which may still involve sparring, may still involve combat activities, but they'll place the tradition and place more of the original intent of techniques over the moving forward. These will be the various branches of karate, kung fu, aikido, and then there comes modern martial arts. I'm making a distinction here because there's 2 forms of modern martial arts. I'll get into the second one later. But first of all, there's modern martial arts. Now these can be martial arts or combat sports which have traditional roots. They have history, but they keep in touch with the contemporary by continually pressure testing, by continually wiping away the old and making room for the new. You know that the people who are at the top of their game in these respective martial arts are the absolute peak. They are the most effective in what they do. So these would include things like boxing, BJJ, Muay Thai, martial arts that may have an older background but still keep up to date with the new. And then we come to the third one, postmodern martial arts. And this is basically just MMA, where instead of it being a specific system of martial arts, it is instead sort of a melting pot for varieties of martial arts. The idea is, it's just what works, works. If someone in the UFC walked into the octagon and said that they were going to win by clucking like a chicken, and they did it, you would hear the local gym become a lot more like KFC.
He's out of line. But he's right.
So we now have these 3 camps, and let's be honest here, divides between these camps is quite often quite different. Now don't get me wrong, postmodern, in MMA you'll find people that have practiced traditional martial arts, but what you'll often find is that either people will say that they have to practice something more modern in order to keep touch, in order to keep base, or they'll say that the traditional martial arts is useless and they need to move on to something else completely. The idea is always that the traditional martial arts is a hampering to their martial ability. At least that's the perspective that people are always told when they practice traditional martial arts and go into that postmodern environment. Whereas modern martial arts, they'll just say that traditional martial arts is crap and you shouldn't practice it at all and should only practice modern or postmodern. Everyone always seems to dunk on traditional.
Everybody hates me!
Don't be silly, not everyone's met you.
Taekwondo is an interesting outlier because it is characterized as a traditional martial art because it maintains tradition over pressure testing, over pushing boundaries within its martial art. So it stays in that traditional mindset, but it stays in that traditional categorizing, but it has the mindset of a modern martial art, because you will often see Taekwondo practitioners, teachers, etc. pushing against other traditional martial arts like karate or kung fu, and then everyone just dumps on Aikido. Taekwondo is especially an interesting outlier because there are people that practice Taekwondo at an Olympic level, which is interesting. Because you would think if Taekwondo was practiced at an Olympic level, it would be more of a modern or post-modern martial art, one that did push its boundaries, but no, it's much more specialised. You don't really see Taekwondo practitioners doing boxing combinations to add to their power. They tend to keep to what they do best. I might even start to say that Taekwondo is its own category in its own right. It's just, what are you? But that's when we come to the next factor here, effectiveness. And this seems to where the big divide comes from in terms of martial arts. That always seems to be the idea, at least, that traditional martial arts, not effective at all, so they have their own, everyone dunks on them. Modern martial arts, they can be effective, but they're a bit too specialised on their own to truly be truly effective. Postmodern martial arts is brilliant and everyone should do it. That seems to be the perspective. But if effectiveness was the only category by which martial arts was allowed to survive and thrive, then we wouldn't have half of the martial arts that we have existing today. I mean, capoeira wouldn't be called effective by any means, and yet its beauty and its history and its culture has allowed it to survive and thrive into the modern day for good reason, the same being for Tai Chi. This is where you see debate on martial arts such as Krav Maga, because the idea is meant to be that Krav Maga was built for the military. It was built, again, for that combat purpose, but so was every martial art. I mean, join the club. The idea that the Krav Maga has any sort of special significance is laughable, especially when you consider how even today, or even when Krav Maga was invented, Krav Maga has to go up against a gun. If they mean more effective in terms of a self-defense situation, certainly any martial art can teach you any sorts of moves. I mean, there's over 180 martial arts out there, but everywhere you go, a punch is a punch. If every martial art teaches you how to throw a punch, every martial art is effective. But not every martial art can teach you that fight or flight, that immediate instinctual knowing of what to do when you get attacked by someone completely random out of the blue. No martial art can truly teach you that. So by those metrics then, how do we define effectiveness? MMA teaches effectiveness by going straight to the point, less faff and more of just the useful points from each martial art, all voltron together into their own conglomeration. But then by that same token, you lose out on the philosophy and the unspoken lessons that come with those techniques. Sand the floor doesn't really have as much of a ring to it if you don't actually sand the floor and put in the hard work to learn that technique. If you're just going, just do that. And within that, we need to question, therefore, what we consider as effective. Because certainly we can say that there's the one camp of effectiveness being defined through competition and pressure testing, but there's the other camp of effectiveness being in terms of just how we live our lives day to day, more of the stoic approach. And in that context, then martial arts such as Tai Chi come back into the forefront. And unlike something like MMA, which takes out that philosophy and perhaps more of the spiritual edge to make way for more of a scientific bent to martial arts, Tai Chi is not really based in most effective in terms of physical combat and more about that spirituality and philosophy. That's where it just lives. And so if you define something as effective by those parameters, well then certainly it looks very effective, honestly. But what about those parts of martial arts which perhaps could be effective but are just repressed? Like, for example, Chin-Na. This is a branch of Chinese martial arts which largely is not practiced that much anymore due to the bend that Chinese martial arts has taken over the years. As it's become more about performance and demonstration, things such as sparring, things such as Chin-Na, things which could more obviously impact the body in a negative way, have been sort of pushed to the side, not practicing much. And so Chin-Na, which is about pins, locks, grapples, things which are more effective, they've been pushed away and largely repressed. And so by that, it leaves the overall image of Chinese martial arts as being not very effective. And so, to anyone that doesn't know about these things and just sees the performance and the demonstration side, Yeah, but it doesn't look very effective.
Round one.
Which is where we really get on to another big factor in terms of the differences here. Media influence. First, looking back at modern and postmodern, you'll have things like boxing, Muay Thai, MMA, Taekwondo, which is more traditional, but for our purposes now, we'll rank it with the others. So these martial arts are defined by the Olympics, by UFC, by boxing matches, by competition, by matches, and so by that it gives it more of a bend of legitimacy. You have a clearly defined goal. You have a winner, you have a loser. You can see what works and what doesn't. You know that these people have trained themselves to their absolute limits, trained their technique to their very best. You know this because you can see it. Whereas more traditional martial arts, like karate, like kung fu, they're seen more, if not in their own competitions, where it's like point sparring, for example, or demonstrations, then you'll have them only in film and television, which has that bend of, it's choreographed, it's not real, you couldn't actually have that happen. And especially in things such as wuxia productions, which deal in magic. So then you go, oh, well, the martial arts, in that can't actually happen in real life, it looks too theatrical, nah, it can't possibly be real. Even with that, you will still have martial arts that, even if they are traditional and not seen as very effective, you'll see them trend upwards once again, with media influence. I mean, just look at what happened with the Ip Man franchise. As soon as that came out in 2008, everyone wanted to learn Wing Chun. Or look at in the 80s, or now. Cobra Kai, Karate Kid, while those were out, everyone wanted to learn karate, especially in America. It's through storytelling that we are inspired in our own stories of our lives. And so if we see someone and we identify with someone who takes on these certain traits or do these certain things, and we want to be more like them, we do these certain things. So if you want to be more like Daniel LaRusso, you'll go and practice karate. You want to be more like Ip Man? Wing Chun. And so we see so far a divide that exists, not just due to reputation through media influence, but also through its goals and aims. While more traditional martial arts have the reputations based in legends, in film, in fiction, so they look more fantastical, but they still inspire people to practice them, and they have more of a influence with spirituality, and with more of the internal sides, where it comes with traditionalism. More modern martial arts and postmodern martial arts, you'll see them have more of a reputation based in competition, in the Olympics, in UFC, in boxing matches, and more of a basis in science, in what is analytical, graphical, what can be tested and pressured, and made to be more effective over time. But now I want to come to this string of the debate, which I heard about a while ago. It's from this one YouTuber named Ramsey Dewey. Now, I would say off the bat, check him out. He is a very, very knowledgeable chap. Very chill videos. He really knows his stuff. Talks more in MMA terms, but still really good. So I would say check him out when you can. But the point I saw him bring up was the idea of traditional martial arts being more like a dead language, like Latin, or like linear inscription. You can study these ancient languages and get more of an understanding, more of a context of how our modern languages were developed. It's useful in that way. And can even be used to create something new, a new language, like what Tolkien did when he was writing his books. You can do that, but it's more effective today to learn a newer language like French, like Italian, like Spanish. That's his idea. And I see why he's making this point, because language is a segment of culture much like martial arts. These two are very much symptoms of the culture they stem from. While he's right in that sort of assessment, I don't think he's quite correct in this more linear idea that he's presenting. Because once a dead language is a dead language, that's it, really. We don't see people suddenly... We don't see whole countries suddenly learning Latin again. Doesn't happen. Whereas martial arts, as we've already mentioned, martial arts goes through trends. So while at the moment people are trekking more towards learning MMA or learning more modern martial arts, there is also that upward tick of people learning more traditional martial arts, such as karate, while Cobra Kai is on the air. And a few years ago it was Wing Chun. And as Ramsey says, you can take a traditional martial art, retool it to fit into the more modern parameters. So that doesn't really mean that the martial art itself, the core traditional martial art, is ineffective. It just means it needs to be updated a little bit. It just needs to be retooled in order to fit a modern slant. And so in these three camps, that is where we lie. We have the traditional martial arts, which deals more in spirituality, in the internal that comes with tradition. We have modern martial arts, which has traditional roots, but still remains effective. And then we have postmodern, which does pretty much just whatever it needs to in order to work. So as we've seen it go on, it's become more and more relying on the physical, on the scientific, which is sort of emblematic of post-Enlightenment society, really. So, but by the time we reach this point of postmodern martial arts, where does the spirituality factor back in? Where does the philosophy factor back in? Okay, people still practice spiritual practice on a personal level, but martial arts has done so much historically in terms of philosophy. I mean, think of how many philosophers go back to martial arts, to some form of combat sport as a reference point and say, if you do this at least once a week, you'll be happier. But how many martial artists have gone into philosophy throughout history? Perhaps it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater to throw the philosophy and the spirituality out of the less effective martial arts. And so while certainly postmodern martial arts are good at what they do, does that necessarily equate to them being good for everything? Because certainly someone that does MMA, someone that does more modern martial arts, they're good for what they do, but how does that help people in everyday life? How does that help people become more spiritually whole? It can on a personal level, but if people are left up the creek without a paddle in this whole system, is it really working? So I would say perhaps we need to go back more to the middle of the modern martial arts and say, hold on a minute. Perhaps we're going a bit too far too quickly. And I think even traditional martial arts needs to take a minute and say, where are we in history? Do we need to move forwards? Make no mistake, I'm someone that practices traditional martial arts as well, and I don't want the spiritual side, the traditional sides of martial arts to be lost completely if we have to move forwards, taking out the less effective techniques. I don't want to throw the tradition out as well, because that's a big part of traditional martial arts. But let's be honest here, even ones like Kung Fu are a joke. In large swaths of Chinese martial arts are just not effective, laughable when compared to even the lowest ranks of the UFC. And that is a shame, because when you consider how the spiritual sides of martial arts, MMA, the postmodern, functions a lot like ancient Chinese martial arts used to, exploring knowledge, trying to learn more, going out into the world and learning new techniques and being experimental. That was what Chinese martial arts, like the Shaolin Temple, that's what they used to do. It was less a system and more a lifestyle. So UFC functions a lot, or MMA functions a lot more like ancient Kung Fu used to. Funny that. So what these two need to do really is meet in the middle. We need to maintain the traditions of the past, certainly, but we need to have an eye on the future as well. Be willing to evolve and move forwards. Not allow ourselves to succumbed to quicksand and sink. Because Kung Fu has been around since at least the 6th century AD. And I don't know about you, but I don't want it to die out anytime soon. But to do that, it needs to be willing to evolve. So, good first step for that would be include sparring once again. Rely less on demonstration and performance. So do I think that this whole divide needs to exist between modern, postmodern and traditional? Not in that order. No. Because there is still something to learn from all of these, from all of these different sectors of martial arts. There's still something to learn. But we need to be willing and humble enough to learn from each other, not to divide up and start going into the trenches. If we're willing to meet in the middle, if we're willing to break bread with each other and be willing to learn from each other, that is great, because it means that everyone can move forwards equally. But if we start just trying to lob insults at each other, or say that something is ineffective and needs to be left into the past, then that's just not going to help anyone. But what do you think? Let us know down in the comments down below. And until next time, thank you all for watching, and peace be with you. We've arrived! Where, you may ask? The future! Right now, outside those doors, is the future of the human race. Want to see what great innovations have come about, how much we've advanced as a species, how we've made contact with other species and other planets far away from our own. It's all right there. It's all right outside those doors, just waiting to be viewed. Spoilers! Unfortunately, knowing too much about your own future can be very dangerous. But thankfully, we do not have to look directly at the future. Okay, I'll put my hands up in a minute. Bring you to the future only to then say you can't view any of it? Yeah, that's a bit unfair of me. But we do not have to look at the future in order to speculate on it. Thankfully, we can look at the past, and judge from there where things will go. Or look at our own present. One thing to bear in mind is that martial arts, much like anything else, is downstream from culture. Martial arts is sort of reflective of where the culture is at a given time. Take, for example, the 80s, which was a time of paranoia, the Red Scare, Vietnam, Cold War, basically, shit hits the fan. And so there was an inrush of Americana. Of America and American heroes being seen as the strong, stoic leaders of the world, bringing freedom and idealism and kickassery to anyone who needed it.
This America. How did you do that?
Or take, for example, post-World War II, where there was a sudden inrush of former soldiers, former veterans, and people who had seen some of the worst atrocities that humanity had ever endured, and suddenly had to try and acclimate back into regular society after warfare. It's fair to say that this was a sort of time where people found it difficult to reacclimatise back into regular society, especially as research into mental disorders surrounding trauma was not as well known as it is now. Even still now, it's not that great. Which is why there was a sudden inrush in traditional martial arts, such as karate, judo, as an inrush of these kinds of martial arts made their way to America and the Western world overall, as it was that need for community, stability, tradition, as well as a sense of structure that gave these veterans what they needed at this time of where, frankly, they no longer fit in anywhere. Another example of that would be biker gangs in the 50s, but that's besides the point. But that's all last century. What about the 21st century? What sort of events define the culture of the 21st century? The more things change, the more they stay the same. But instead of a reliance on traditionalism, it's a very different kettle of fish we find this time. Where before it was an inrush of traditional martial arts, it's now an inrush of modern martial arts. Of martial arts such as boxing, as Muay Thai, even though that's a more traditional martial art. MMA, BJJ. Martial arts defined on evolution. Defined by constant pressure testing. Why is this? Well, it's something very similar to what was found post-World War II. It's the need to be prepared, to make sure that there's not only a community for veterans, but also to ensure that the next generation is prepared. And in this time especially, as the world is changing very quickly. We've spoken before about AI, but technology overall is continually changing and evolving. The place of people in that world is swiftly changing as a result. The need to change with that world is as important as the change in technology. Hence why there's such a focus on martial arts which require constant pressure testing, constant evolution. But there's another thing that these martial arts have in common as well. They're easy to understand. With all that change comes pressure, anxiety. It's tough enough to remember just what you had for breakfast, but it's another thing to remember a whole kettle of kata or a whole line of code. Things become more and more complex as they change more and more. Things that yesterday were the new thing are now suddenly the old thing as the new thing comes along. So having something simple and something easy to understand, well, it's a respite from that constant changing pressure, from that constant changing context. Take boxing for example. You put the gloves on, you punch the other guy until the other guy falls down. All there's strategy involved. There's technique, there is training. But the basic concept of hit the guy until he falls down doesn't really change. It's just learning the how and the why. MMA falls into that same context. And taking into consideration such things as cost of living crises and the fact that certain currencies no longer have as much meaning as they once did, that means that certain levels of crime are on the rise, meaning that the need for self-defense is also more important than ever before. Now, me personally, I'm not someone that's going to harp on about self-defense too much, because, frankly, it's full of enough jibber-jabber, to use the technical term. Rules when it comes to self-defense can be made and unmade very quickly. It's not really meant for hard and fast rules, it's more about doing what is necessary in the current context. If, say, someone has a knife, it may be necessary to talk your way out of it, or it may be necessary to fight your way out of it, or just to run away. So putting self-defense advice aside, it can't be ignored that there is a need for it, for learning some form of self-defense. But that's all judging based on the present, on what's currently going on. How will that evolve into the future? Well, the way I see it, there's one of two possibilities. There is a stark movement towards a return to traditionalism, for a very good reason, because, well, in the wake of all of this change and uncertainty and anxiety and pressure, quite frankly, people are lost. There is a search for meaning, for normalcy. In many ways, this has led to a rise in such things as a return to Christianity, which is always a good thing. But it can also lead to a return to traditionalism. But not traditionalism in the same sense. Because as I've said, technology and the need for constant change and innovation has come along as well. And I think, as I've spoken about before, traditional martial arts can learn from that. In just the very simple way of reintroducing sparring, pressure testing, making room not only for those traditions, for kata, but also making that room for pressure testing and for change and innovation. This is how these martial arts evolved to begin with, and it's needed if they are to continue. Or there's the other option. Instead of people moving towards traditional martial arts once more, they'll instead remain with more modern martial arts, with MMA, BJJ, boxing. And this is certainly possible, and I don't think that these sorts of martial arts will lose their fans anytime soon, because quite frankly, they are good at what they do. But I think if they do continue to be maintained and grown, that may mean that some traditional martial arts will die out as a result, just because of a lack of people maintaining these traditional martial arts. So as a result, sadly, they will go. But I don't think that's as likely, truth be told. Because don't get me wrong, I think that MMA and such is here to stay. But I don't think it will do anything as crazy as killing off traditional martial arts either. I don't think it could do that. There's a third option which I think is interesting. It unfortunately has to be noted that 2024 is, well, aside from being a tumultuous election year, as always, it's also a year full of risk of warfare. I don't think I need to say where or what, because I think you know already. And unfortunately, even with technology being where it is, the need for mankind on the battlefield is still necessary. Whether it's right or wrong, that's another matter, but it is necessary. And with that, sure, you need to know how to use such things as guns, but you also need to know how to fight. So some martial arts will be needed. But what will happen next is interesting. As has happened before with other martial arts or with certain strains of fighting styles, post-warfare, those warriors will have nowhere to go. Once again, just like at the end of World War II, there will be veterans who will need stability, who will need to acclimatise back into the regular life. They'll want their own spaces. Their own spaces in order to maintain these skills and to teach them to the next generation, as has happened before. So just like other martial arts and other fighting styles, something interesting could happen. These styles, which once were fluid, constant, evolving, changing, just like the battlefield, could calcify, could fossilize, could turn into traditional martial arts, as happened with Jiu-Jitsu and the sword arts in Japan, as happened with the samurai, and as happened with the boom in traditional martial arts in America after World War II. The same could happen to Krav Maga, to BJJ, to maybe even to MMA. I'm not saying that this would happen to the point of them learning kata or anything, but I think it would happen to the point of where there'll be certain inflexibilities which calcify within the martial art. It's arguable this has already happened if you take into consideration such martial arts as Jeet Kune Do, which started out as a precursor to MMA, as it was all about evolution and constant change and pressure testing, but over time has developed its own traditions and its own cases of inflexibilities within the martial art. Or maybe something else could happen entirely. It could certainly possible that a new martial art could be fortified, spring forth out of the ether. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future, and I wonder, will one of you have a part to play in that future? Something tells me yes. Whatever you make of the subject, comment down below with your thoughts and predictions, and let us speculate down below on what we think will happen. Now, if you don't mind, you may not be able to see the future, but I can, so until next time, thank you for watching and peace be with you.